I'm Lisa K. Donner, along with Graham Noble, Tim Donner, Joe Schaefer, and Sarah Cowgill, and this is Liberty Nation's online news program. On today's episode, cops and Crips. It's getting to be a gangland-style shootout as anarchists put law enforcement in their crosshairs. Hairgate and hypocrisy. Nancy Pelosi offers a textbook lesson on how to throw a small business owner who's doing you a favor under the bus. Speaking of throwing people under the bus, what the heck is the Biden campaign doing sending their candidate to Pittsburgh to look like a stooge and sound like a liar? Our Liberty Nation panel dissects a segment we called Fracking Joe. And pole dancing. No, it won't be Sarah and I at the Gentlemen's Club. We'll be talking about the latest polls that appear to be twisting and turning and gyrating disco style. And finally, Deep Thoughts. Our conservative panel offers up some personal reflections, meditations, and crazy concepts. So fasten your seatbelt, folks. Guys, are the anarchists aiming to spill cop blood? That's the question before us. Tim, what do you think?
Well, I don't think they're trying to spill cop blood. I know they are. They've been doing it for months. They've proven it night after night in over 24 cities across the land. You know, some things are beyond discussion or questioning because from the start, cops were always the target. First because of the George Floyd killing, and then just because the mob wants anarchy or Marxism and they got to get rid of the police in order to do it. And the public attitude was favorable at first after the Floyd event, but it's deeply personal when you consider the number of protesters that have aimed, for example, lasers at the eyes of police trying to blind them. They're not aiming those at any other bystanders or any other people participating or even people opposing them other than police. It's always at police. But I might add, as these anarchists are trying to spill police blood, I think you all know that Governor Andrew Cuomo in New York is looking like he wants to spill Trump's blood because he's actually threatened the life of the President of the United States, the governor of New York, by saying that if he comes to New York, he'll need an army to be safe. This is what it's come to.
Yeah, and in this culture of lawlessness, as the Chicago police superintendent pointed out, it doesn't end with cops. It doesn't end with targeting cops. Innocent civilians are being killed. We're seeing young, innocent people, the police superintendent said, being shot, complete disregard for law. In Seattle, they went after a police precinct, and the Seattle police chief said that every cop on duty that night had to respond, which left every law-abiding citizen in the city of Seattle at a threat. Democrats, it's an untenable political situation. You're supporting this that's going to get innocent civilians and more cops killed. They have to denounce Black Lives Matter, and the progressives will not let them do it.
Well, I don't even understand what the heck what's the end game here? I have no idea what they can be thinking. They can't get rid of police. They can't defund police and just run willy-nilly in the streets, or you're going to have a few more people like Kyle Rittenhouse popping up, and people are going to start taking things into their own hands. This is not smart. I don't understand what the heck the end game is, and I want somebody to explain it to me.
I think Sarah's got to the heart of the matter there, because when you think about it, usually either political party, when they push a narrative, there is a strategy behind it. They're trying to actually achieve something which, from their point of view, seems logical and seems like a winning political issue. This one isn't. This one's terrible. I mean, I've personally lived in a neighborhood in New Orleans to which the New Orleans Police Department were almost daily visitors. And they weren't there because they liked it so much. And they weren't there because they were looking for people to harass. They were there because they were called by a resident. And this is really, again, another example to me of the Democrats taking the black vote completely for granted, because, I know for a fact that if you go out to any of these inner city neighborhoods in any city in this country and you ask the locals there, do you want more police or less police? They're either going to say, well, about the same as now, or no, we need more police presence. So Sarah's right. There actually is no logical end game behind this.
I mean, you can't call to defund police. You can't show up and disrupt a neighborhood or a city, and then somebody gets hurt in your little group and you call police and nobody shows up. You can't have it both ways. So what the heck are they doing?
Let's just remember, though, Tim and Sarah, this is the party that never once in all 4 days of their convention did they even mention violence. And I even heard one talking point, it was mind-boggling. They said, well, they were all peaceful protests until about a week and a half ago.
Until the Trump people showed up. But you know, I did a piece on libertynation.com entitled Lessons from Martin Luther King, No Peace, No Justice. And what it says is, you know, we keep hearing that expression. We've heard it for years, maybe decades, the common expression of protesters, no justice, no peace. But what we're realizing, what they're realizing now, what the true racial justice warriors, the people who are serious about it, are realizing is that you're not going to get any justice if you don't provide a peaceful protest. If you don't provide and you don't do what you're doing peacefully, people are not going to respond to your message. And right now, I mean, the numbers are cratering for Joe Biden and the Democrats across the nation. Support for Black Lives Matter is taking a swan dive because people are realizing finally what this organization and what this movement is about. If the people who are serious about racial justice and police reform are truly serious, they will actively purge the insurrectionists who are committing all this mayhem in their name.
Well, they can't purge them. How can they? I mean, how do they pick them out? Half of them, they don't even know who they are or where they're coming from. I don't know. I don't see that happening. You've got a mayor in Portland who was Black Lives Matter, and this is what our city is all about, and we're going to change things. Holy heck! They ran him out of his condo. They tried to set it on fire. They, were harassing the neighbors and graffitiing the whole place. And so how is that helpful? He can't tell them to stop.
Well, the point is, I'm not even saying that they can. What I'm saying is that they must, if they want their message to get through, if we want to actually do anything about racial justice, and we really want to do something about police reform, the people who are serious about it need to separate themselves from the insurrectionists, or all people are going to see is the violence, and that's what they're going to vote on.
But Tim, the problem is in the modern Democratic Party today, which is controlled by the progressive grassroots, we saw it in the primary, you cannot be the one who takes a step back from the wokeness. You always have to be taking that extra step forward towards the wokeness. So for them, anyone who denounces, Joe Biden denounced Black Lives Matter, that's a step back. That is not allowed in the Democratic Party today. He's stuck. He is absolutely stuck, and I don't see how he can get out. He can't get out of this.
He condemned the violence, but he didn't condemn the organizations behind it. So if you're just condemning violence writ large, you're not getting to the root of the matter, whereas Trump is identifying exactly who is stirring all of this up. So people have as clear a contrast as you could possibly get when it comes to law and order.
But in the name of all this, justice, you have individuals, and that's the problem. I mean, you have a baby in a baby carriage being shot, or even, careers destroyed. The black female police chief in, what was it, Oregon or Portland? Does anybody know? She resigned.
Yes, in Seattle. She resigned because she refused to get any support from the Seattle mayor, who's probably Jenny Durkin, who's probably second behind Ted Wheeler as the least popular mayor in the country.
Right, Oregon or Portland, Seattle or Portland, duh. Nancy Pelosi was caught with her hair down. She was getting the royal treatment from a salon in California. And it's interesting, Sarah, because my hairdresser was just telling me that in California, you can't even blow dry hair outside. And the reason is because you might be blowing around the coronavirus.
That is true. I mean, as of September 1, they were allowed to do cuts, etc. In California. However, Nancy couldn't wait an extra day and scheduled an appointment, walked in, had her stylist, who was not the salon owner. The stylist rents a space from the salon owner. Her stylist came in, has a key, did Nancy up. The stylist or the salon owner found out, got a little ticked off, and didn't like the double standards, leaked the footage to the press, and it took off. And people are ticked off at Nancy Pelosi, and Nancy Pelosi is ticked off that somebody ratted her out.
I think it's even
video looking like a drowned rat. I'd be mad too.
It's even worse than that. I mean, what's even worse than that was her response, where she tried to act like she was set up. It reminds me of Marion Barry in Washington when he said, rhymes with witch, set me up. I mean, that's what she's trying to pass off when it's obvious to anyone who checks. And the salon owner herself said it when she was on the Tucker Carlson show this week, that Pelosi's office had called to set up the appointment. And Nancy Pelosi gets out there and tries to say, I apologize for trusting.
I didn't know anything about a local salon in my own district that I should know everything about. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, speaking of which, I mean, Graham, did you hear that the salon owner was getting death threats?
Well, I haven't heard that, but it doesn't surprise me one little bit. That's how unhinged these people are. I mean, personally, I think Nancy Pelosi should have done what I did, which was just a DIY job. I think she would have looked incredibly woke if she had just gone with the, shave it all off and let it be spiky. I think it'd be great. I mean, but I think Nancy Pelosi has to worry more about her favorability rating, which is currently, according to Gallup, at a giddy 39%. But that is not as bad as the fact that her unfavorability rating is now 55%, which is the highest it has been since before the 2010 midterms. And we all know what happened, of course, in the 2010 midterms. And, I think she needs to worry about that a little more than her hair.
And let's not forget Mayor Kenny in Philadelphia, one of the more progressive mayors in the country, will not allow the people in the city to eat in a restaurant. So he goes off to Maryland for a nice little weekend, and he's eating in a restaurant without a mask. The hypocrisy is unbelievable. And they're doing this in an election year when you would think Democrats want to connect, at least pretend to connect with real people. They're distancing themselves all the more. It doesn't seem like it's even important to them, which I think is just really amazing. Like I said, in an election year for them to do that. Wow.
And Pelosi,
but they don't think about the consequences of their actions. I mean, this lady could lose her shop, and apparently this guy, her actual stylist, could lose his license over this debacle.
She will be shut down because they'll have demonstrations outside. There might be some violence. There might be some looting. She'll be targeted and canceled, and she will be forced to move. And again, Nancy Pelosi could have, kind of laid low or issued a real apology, but instead she issues an apology where she tries to make herself look like an innocent victim. I'll tell you, this story has legs. Because the average voter looking at career politicians, I'll tell you what, this is exactly the kind of thing that caused Trump to be elected in 2016. This kind of rank, breathtaking hypocrisy.
24 hours. She could have waited 24 hours. She didn't.
But then she would have had to, be around all those little people.
Oh, yeah.
Here she could have the place to herself.
And their presidential candidate is doing this. Joe Biden flies to Pittsburgh for a campaign event and he speaks to an empty room with a handful of reporters there, doesn't even take questions with the reporters. I don't know why they were there. Then he gets back in his airplane and flies to his basement. They're trying to run a whole government political system that doesn't involve the regular folks. So why would you think of the little people when you want to get your wash and blow? You don't think about them. It's not part of your life.
Do you wear a mask when you're washing your hair? I always have a mask.
That to me is a very interesting point, Joe, because let's face it, a lot of these politicians, especially the ones that have been shouting the loudest about the social distancing and the wearing of the masks and shutting everything down, they have never taken any of that seriously from day one. And I honestly believe that, I hate to sound like a, sinister conspiracy theorist, but I've honestly believed that the entire lockdowns and all of this other nonsense that went along with it was largely about these politicians saying, we have a golden opportunity here to get ordinary people out of politics. We'll lock them all away in their houses. We will, they treat us like mushrooms. We're to be kept in the dark and fed on something that begins with S. And I really think it is. I really think they love this whole thing about let's just keep the entire population locked away in their houses and we can just go about our business and do what we want. And somehow nobody's going to complain about that.
Yeah, if you keep people scared for long enough, then, the fear will become real. And then, the plan is to blame the COVID on Trump. It's almost as if they're saying, Trump sort of developed the COVID in a laboratory because he's such a fascist and dictator and hates the American people. I mean, they're literally one step short of saying that. And, the COVID was a political blessing for the left because Trump was on a glide path to re-election without the COVID. And then the COVID hits and it threw everything into disarray. And they've been capitalizing on a public health crisis, which we've all seen the hardball of politics, but I still believe, maybe I'm just naive, but I still think capitalizing on a public health crisis for political benefit is shameful.
This week, the Democratic nominee, Joe Biden, went to Pennsylvania, and his campaign strategist shuffled Joe Biden off to Pittsburgh to deny he would bring the fracking industry to its knees. They call him apparently Fracking Joe in the Keystone State. Doth he protesteth too much, Graham?
Yes, I think that's a big problem. I think the fracking is a huge problem, especially in a state like Pennsylvania. And I think the idea that he can now go up there and say, oh, no, we're not going to ban fracking. That's a bit like when you hear a Democrat say, oh, I don't want to take your guns. It's the same thing. And you see what they do with gun control is, no, they're not going to simply take your guns, but they're going to, through regulation and laws and all kinds of other backroom staff, behind-the-scenes staff, they're going to make it damn near impossible for you to buy a gun or own a gun or carry a gun or buy the ammunition for the gun. This is what they do. They're going to do the same with fracking. So sure, they won't, but he's not going to ban fracking, but he will make sure it's regulated out of existence. And I think people actually understand that. And of course, Joe Biden has said in the past that he is all about actually, getting rid of fracking, call it banning or don't call it banning. But he's about getting rid of it. Just back in one of the presidential debates in March, Bernie Sanders just kind of lost it and started talking about no ifs, ands, or buts about it. We're going to get rid of fracking. And Joe Biden turned around and said, yeah, I agree with him. So I think he's got a major problem there.
The thing that I can't understand, and it speaks to a shocking level of incompetence in the Biden campaign, is that they would send him to that empty warehouse with people sitting in these little painted circles with their notebooks and pens, even though they're not allowed to ask questions and they could watch the whole thing on TV like the rest of us, is how they could let him make a statement that he's not opposed to fracking. First of all, you don't repeat the charge made against you. That's political malpractice 101. You don't repeat the charge. I remember when Christine O'Donnell running for the Senate in Delaware in 2010 somebody called her a witch, and she did an ad saying, "I'm not a witch." Well, that was the end of that campaign. You don't repeat the charge. But what they did was they sent him out to claim that he was that he was in favor of fracking, wants to continue it, it's just fine. When there's so much footage over months and months of him saying that he was going to shut down the entire fossil fuel industry, the disingenuousness of it is amazing. But the political malpractice of trying to claim something where there's clear evidence on tape that you said the opposite is beyond anything I can understand.
Well,
in a presidential campaign.
I think you have to understand that they sent him to Pennsylvania. They didn't send him to the oil and gas country in the Southwest. Texas is not going to be the place to send that message. It's Pennsylvania. That's the state they're most worried about. That's the state they want to be able to beat Trump in. Then they've already got New Mexico sewed up because there's nothing but a bunch of liberal people trying to shut down every oil and gas organization and company in the Southwest. So if you talk to any people in the industry whatsoever, they hate Joe Biden. They don't care what he's trying to resurrect. They heard him say, "I agree with Bernie Sanders," and they have seen him embrace Bernie Sanders moving forward. This is not an industry that's going to change their minds on voting for Joe Biden. They're just not going to do it.
Yeah, and it's another example, I think, to me, of you can't run away from that woke progressive primary they had. They all had to say all kinds of crazy things. Universal health care for illegal aliens, sure, raise your hand. Transgender kids, vetting the Department of Education nominee, Elizabeth Warren, sure, I'm all for that. They had to just make one ridiculous promise after another to get through that primary. And then they all flood to Joe Biden like it's all going to be okay, and we're not going to remember that we didn't have video of them talking on national television for all those months. They panicked when they took this guy, and now he's supposed to be the Trojan horse who's going to sneak in all those things that they felt wouldn't win a presidential election. But it's the internet age. You're not going to run away. You're not going to be able to run away and hide from all those things you had to say along the way.
All right, guys, it is time for pole dancing. We're going to let Frank insert some pole dancing of Sarah here. While the polls are seesawing a bit, Democrats appear to be scrambling for a new message. Joe, are you seeing this, or is it just me?
Well, I have an interesting question, and I'd love for someone to answer it. I don't believe in the polls when they showed Biden cruising to victory a couple months ago. I thought they were worthless. So now they're sort of going Trump's way a little bit. The polls that I never believed 2 months ago. So should I be believing them now? I didn't believe them then. I don't believe them now. I don't think polls really are that accurate. First of all, you've got Trump voters who hate the media. They're not going to be honest and say, hey, yeah, I'm supporting President Trump to some guy that they don't respect. So there's a hidden vote there. You can tweak and manipulate polls. So should we be believing these polls, even though they're going Trump's way a little bit more now?
I think you should believe Rasmussen, because Rasmussen, not only because LibertyNation.com is sponsoring their presidential tracking poll, did it for a couple of weeks during the convention, and he'll do it again in the run-up to the election, the 2 weeks before that. But the reason we did it is because Rasmussen was the only poll that was correct in 2016, the only one of all of them. And no less than Gallup decided to get out of the presidential polling business because polling is broken. They admitted that the day after the election, and yet we're supposed to look at the polls now and take meaning from them. The only one that has real meaning is the Rasmussen poll, and Lisa can explain, as our polling geek, exactly why that's true. But that's the poll to watch.
Well, thank you for that brief commercial message, Tim. Operators are standing by. Graham, Sarah, hit it.
You know what? I don't like polls. I have not liked them. I didn't trust them in 2016. I calmed the fears of people who didn't know what were going on for weeks. They just didn't understand the statistical process And I think it's a big sham, smoke and mirrors, as you like to say, Lisa. But the other thing is, I mean, look at when Clinton, the bumbling Clinton, came out of Arkansas. And we had George H.W. Bush coming off of a 6-week war, Desert Storm, pounded in, outdone, we surrender, we give up, we win, were all the headlines, including the Washington Post. And he got his butt kicked because he didn't know the cost of a loaf of bread. People are fickle. They're just fickle. And at this point, I don't think a lot of people are changing their minds. So whoever voted for Trump 2016 and add a few extra people are going to do it again. I think polls are ridiculous.
Well,
And I'd even go one step further than that in terms of people being fickle, and say that I'm quite certain that a lot of the people, and I personally have never been polled about anything in my life. So I'd like to know who these people are who are even
better
getting
than to
polled.
poll you.
Yeah, they do. Yeah,
I wouldn't call you either.
they won't get an answer that that they can include in their polls. But I think, you know, even more than being fickle is I quite. This sounds terribly harsh and cynical, but I'm being honest. I believe that a lot of people who answer the polls, I believe a lot of thoughtful, you know, people who put a lot of thought into politics and who actually take an interest in politics are probably actually even less likely to respond to pollsters. And so I think a lot of the people that are answering these polls, no matter what the poll is about, no matter what the questions are, I think a lot of time they're giving an impulsive answer. They hear the question from the pollster and they just say, oh, yeah, that sounds right. Yes, I'm going to say yes to that. And I don't think they're putting a lot of thought into it. So I don't think polls in general are, you know, by definition, they can't be that reliable, because the people who are answering the polls, unfortunately, are not that reliable.
I will say one thing in defense of these pollsters. They got 2018, the midterm elections, largely right. So what does that tell us? It tells us that when a candidate like Trump is on the ticket, where there's so many people who will refuse to divulge that they're for Trump, for understandable reasons, people who would love to put a bumper sticker on their car but never would, someone who might love to wear a MAGA hat but never would. These people cannot be quantified. They couldn't in 2016 because so many of them didn't vote before. So Trump just throws a monkey wrench into the whole thing. And if anything, in 2020, it's going to be even worse, because in this climate, you have to expect that there's even more people who aren't going to give an honest answer to the polls. So I think they're almost incapable of measuring the electorate properly in the age of Trump.
And, you know, do you really need a poll to measure enthusiasm in a presidential race? Everybody knew in 2016 who had the enthusiasm. It was Trump and his supporters. No Democrats were enthusiastic about Hillary. They would swallow hard and vote for her, but they weren't excited about her at all. Biden's even worse. Nobody is thrilled to run out and vote for this guy. It's one of the biggest reasons they want mail-in voting, because no one's going to leave their house, go out there and make an effort to vote for this guy. So, you know, we all saw that in 2016. It was one of the reasons I strongly believe Trump was going to win, and I wasn't alone in that. You could just look at his rallies and look at Hillary's and see the difference. Joe Biden's not even going to have rallies, apparently. He's going to stay hidden for 2 months, and all the enthusiasm is going to stay with Trump, more so than it was in 2016, in my opinion.
Did you notice, Joe, that nobody on the panel answered your question?
I thought they did. I thought they kind of fleshed it out to me.
I'm going to answer it right now, and I'm going to tell you it depends upon which poll you use. You have to get to the sampling. Generally, the swing state polls are going to tell you more than the national polls, but you have to look at the crosstabs, see how many Democrats they are, sampling versus Republicans. But go ahead.
And likely voters. I mean, you know, are they just registered Democrats, or are they likely voters? That's another little, you know, wiggle in the bigger monkey, bigger wrench theory that Tim was talking about. So,
right.
You know, there was
wait a sec. But Joe, I cut you off. What were you going to say?
No, it's fine. You go. I was done.
You know, there was another poll in 2016, which you and I followed quite closely, Lisa, called the LA Times tracking poll. which was actually the only other poll other than Rasmussen that got it right. It wasn't counted as a regular poll because they used a different methodology. But they got it right, and yet they don't have it this year because the LA Times, which is a left-wing operation, was embarrassed that they actually predicted a Trump victory. So now we don't even have a second poll beyond Rasmussen that you can really count on.
All righty. Well, time for deep thoughts with so much going on in the 24/7 news cycle spinning like a top. Let's take a moment for reflection. Tim, what stuck in your head this week in terms of culture and politics?
Well, I was reading a book by a guy named, an author named John Eldridge, and there was a quote in there that speaks to the difference between Trump and typical politicians. It's a quote from someone named
Let's see the book. What's the name of the book?
Pierce. Well, the name of the book is Becoming a King. You can see it a little bit there. But this passage doesn't necessarily refer to kingship, but it says there are many people who think they want to be matadors, only to find themselves in the ring with 2,000 pounds of bull bearing down on them, and then discover that what they really wanted was to wear the tight pants and hear the crowd roar. Is that not the typical politician that wants the tight pants and the roar of the crowd, but they don't want to actually stand for anything, and they cannot take the heat of 2,000 pounds of bull descending on them? Donald Trump can do it.
I've seen Graham in those tight pants, and it's scary.
I don't want to see anybody, any politician or any one of us.
We don't need to see anybody on Capitol Hill in tight pants either.
All right, deep thoughts, Graham, go.
Well, mine, my ongoing greatest concern right now is the speed at which the November election is going to be resolved. Now basically people are starting to say, look, it's really getting to the point where we may not know the result on the evening of November 3rd or the early morning of November 4th. It may be days, it may be weeks. I think that is incredibly dangerous for this country. Nobody wins when you've got that kind of delay to a presidential election, especially, and I hate to say this because it seems that every presidential election we all say this is the most consequential. Important. But you know what? Maybe this one really is because never has there been such a huge difference and never has there been such animosity between the two sides. So I really believe that this election is in fact probably the most consequential presidential election in living memory. And for us to be waiting days or even weeks to get the result, I believe that unless the results that come in on the evening of November 3rd are just razor thin gap between the two sides, I believe that the candidate who looks as if they're going to lose, whether it is Mr. Trump or Mr. Biden, they need to do the right thing and concede. Because we cannot have a delay of weeks to find the result. Country will fall apart.
And that won't happen, and that's too bad. They're already prepping for why we are not having an answer.
I think if anything, Joe Biden will never concede. Everybody on the left, from Nancy Pelosi to all kinds of other people who are leftists, are basically saying, don't ever concede. There may never be a concession. I mean, Axios is running a story. I thought they used to be somewhat journalistically credible, but now they're peddling this story that on election night that it's going to look like Trump won in a landslide, whereas in fact, once all the votes are counted, once all the mail-in ballots are assembled and counted, that in fact Joe Biden will win. They're putting that out there now.
Yeah, they're setting the absolute stage for all of us little voters, that want to know what happened on election night, to wait in limbo for weeks upon weeks upon weeks, which will create more unrest, more civil unrest, more violence in the streets. No one's going to concede on election night, I fear.
Joe.
Deep thoughts. I wrote a couple articles this week covering Biden's actions, and I say this with no, not in a light or just thrown off way. I watched that bizarre event in Pittsburgh 2 or 3 times in its entirety. I watched his presser in Delaware to see him answer questions from the press for about a half hour. And I'm telling you, Joe Biden does not look well. He's getting worse. He looked so demonstrably tired in that Q&A in Delaware. There were no major missteps. He didn't say anything wrong, but he wasn't asked any surprising questions, nothing that would make him think quick on his feet. And he was noticeably sighing and like fatigue, real fatigue, halfway through it. I truly think, I'm saying it's probably not going to happen, but it is not out of the realm of possibility that he's not going to make it to November. He's just not going to make it. I can't see him doing 3 debates. I don't see him being physically up for it. And this is a much, much bigger problem than people are letting on. He's getting worse. He really is. And Democrats have a major problem on their hands. They got to hide their presidential candidate until November, and I don't think they can do it.
That's a really good point. And I've written extensively about his 2 neurological episodes, many of which most Americans don't know about. If you do a Google search, they're actually hard to find. You know, and I think this stuff, you know, wears on you after a while. Sarah, I know you're someone with many, many deep thoughts. Can you give us a pearl?
Yeah, I'm just wondering where the heck Mike Lavinetti is when we need him. Other than his disappearance, much like the former vice president, I've been working on a piece this week about perhaps people funding rioters traveling across the country and going from city to city. Like the Kenosha report just came out that a huge percentage weren't even of the arrests weren't even people that were local. So that's what I've been working on this week, and it's kind of weighing a little bit heavy on me.
All right, well, I will close us out. My deep thought takes us all the way back to Crosby, Stills, and Nash, that song Deja Vu. You know, we have all been here before. Well, not literally, of course, but America has seen all this before, most notably in 1968. Many parallels, if you really consider the civil unrest, the election between Nixon and Humphrey, the buildings on college campuses that were taken over. But you know, in many ways, when you watch that stuff from 68, it tends to be comforting, because if we can make it through 1968, we can make it through 2020. And that's it for another edition of Truth TV. Thanks so much for tuning in. And remember to look for Liberty Nation in your favorite search engine, subscribe to our daily briefing, and check out our new Roku channel. And remember, liberty all the time and everywhere.
Ready, set, go.
Stay ahead of the curve with LibertyNation.com, because we put the power of the press in your hands. With one click, Liberty Nation delivers tomorrow's news.
And remember, liberty
Today.
all the time and everywhere.
Liberty Nation connected the dots between a Chinese research biolab and a wet market where COVID-19 was supposedly discovered 2 months before the MSM. We were first to alert you of a serious attack on gun rights in Virginia. LN honed in on the Biden-Burisma scandal months before it hit the papers. We brought you exclusive interviews from the border.
We're looking at people just rising up.
Liberty Nation was on the ground in London,
Trump rally in front of the American embassy,
bringing you on-the-scene reports about Brexit. LN reported that COVID-19 was more virulent but less deadly weeks before others. LibertyNation.com delivers tomorrow's news today with LNTV's Liberty Nation Radio, The Uprising and Rabbit Hole podcasts, and dozens of insightful original articles, and a new Roku channel. Stay ahead of the curve with LibertyNation.com and get tomorrow's news today. LibertyNation.com.